Welcome back to On the Mind. I'm Austin.
I am Duncan.
And we are going to be talking about the Comey memo. And it alludes to, obviously, the special counsel Robert Mueller, a former FBI director. Correct. So, Duncan, why don't you go and do the traditional background?
Okay, so as you know, there's been quite a lot of controversy surrounding the firing of former FBI Director James Comey in Washington for about the past week. Now, up until this point, there's been some speculation that a special prosecutor might be brought in. The reality is, now at this point, however, that there is some degree of evidence that Trump directly asked Comey to stop the investigation into the possible connections, between his campaign and the Russian government at the dinner to which many of Trump's tweets and Comey's statements to have this point alluded.
Absolutely. So what we're talking about here is not so much as dead hard evidence, but enough to get an investigation started.
Correct. Now, just to clarify for those of you who might not have heard of this yet, the New York Times reported yesterday that an unnamed government official within the FBI had seen a departmental memo that Comey had sent out shortly before his ouster, in which he stated that Trump had specifically asked him to basically back off of the investigation. And the wording was such that it's a little hard to tell how you would have interpreted that in the moment.
What I read was that it had to do with the part of the investigation into Michael Flynn.
Correct.
So Trump, I don't think, was so much thinking about Russia there as I think that how it was worded was, Michael Flynn's a good guy. Why don't you back off that investigation?
And I agree with that, but my one concern with this at this point is that it was to some degree political because, of course, a great deal of the controversy, the speculation about Trump's connections to Russia, be they what they may, has involved Michael Flynn specifically. Mm-hmm. So certainly there was a political element to this. In other words, if the Michael Flynn investigation goes away, it all kind of quietly dies down and the Trump administration can sort of get back to flailing around trying to run the country.
What I'm saying is, I don't think Trump thinks that far ahead. And as much, I know he does want the Russia story to go away because it's fake news.
Sure.
But what I'm saying here is he a brilliant schemer? Absolutely not.
No, but I do see the possibility that he could have perceived that there's some political gain to one of the more embarrassing incidents in his presidency sort of quietly getting buried. Which, presidents from time immemorial have tried to do similar things. It's not like this is anything new.
Absolutely, but I think the large difference is how Trump is handling things.
Oh, I agree. There's much less subtlety involved here than there has been in times past.
Mm-hmm. So, what we're talking about, it's going to be interesting because I'm pretty sure that the memo has already been subpoenaed.
Correct. Now, just to be clear, the New York Times article cited an unnamed government official who claimed to have seen the memo. Other than that, no one has come forward, A, with a copy of the memo, which is, of course, the most important thing at this point, or B, specifically testifying as to the content of it or its existence. So that's the first thing that needs to be established in any investigation, is the existence and content of said memo.
There is someone that could likely tell you exactly whether or not that memo existed, and that would be James Comey.
Who, by the way, is now going to be testifying before the Senate, I believe, here next week, if I recall correctly, is the scheduled date.
I want to say that the most important part of that is whether it's going to be public or private, because he said he'd only testify as long as it was public.
Correct, although the Senate does still have the right to subpoena him for hearings into this particular matter, but be that as it may, it's going to be very interesting because, of course, they've recently had his deputy director, now the acting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, brought up for similar questioning in a very informal capacity. It wasn't actually a formal hearing. It was on another matter, but they did still ask him a few questions about the content of any investigation into Michael Flynn and Russia and whatnot. So it's going to be a very interesting situation that now we've got the acting director of the FBI and his immediate former predecessor that are both going to be testifying and to some degree apparently offering different perspectives on this.
Well, that is kind of interesting that they'll be offering different perspectives, but I guess Comey did have direct meetings with Trump.
Correct.
So that leads to some things that perhaps Rosenstein didn't see.
Correct. And, another thing that's worth kind of noting here is that even if you accept that, other people probably didn't know the full content of that discussion, other people were privy to the content of any investigations that had gone on, at least up to that point. So if there are discrepancies there, that's going to be another interesting point to kind of keep an eye on.
So this is obviously add a lot of speculation into the news cycle.
Correct.
So let's not get your hopes up yet. Even if there is evidence there, it's going to take a while to impeach Trump. And as we've said before, there's no guarantee that Pence will be anything better, just perhaps more stable.
Right. And, let's also not forget that even if this was found to be absolute fact in terms of the content that was in the memo, that's still not an absolute guarantee that Trump would be removed from office, because there would still be the matter of how were those words said in the context of the conversation itself. Were they intended to be more or less in order to back off of an active FBI investigation? There are a lot of ifs here, so we don't want to present too much as fact that is not fact here.
However, there is a sense of being fed up in the atmosphere, especially nowadays. Especially, there was a poll that came out, and 48% of Americans polled said they would be willing to start the impeachment process for Trump. And that includes 17% of them were people that actually voted for him.
Correct. Although it's worth noting that the impeachment process isn't quite that simple. It does actually require some kind of criminal activity to have been committed in order for it to proceed forward. It's not as if you can just do impeachment via popular referendum.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm sure there are ways around things. If there was a completely willing populace, I'm sure there are ways to implement such features. However, it'd probably take his entire presidency to implement it. So
yeah, and you'd actually have to manufacture a crime for him to commit to do that. There's no such thing as a no confidence vote in the United States Constitution, which is something that probably should change. Most parliamentary systems throughout the world do have what's called a no confidence vote that can effectively remove an executive. That's something we probably should look into putting in our Constitution, but at the moment there is not a non-criminal mechanism for it.
I will also point out, while we're talking about Trump and impeachment, one of my favorite representatives in Congress, even before all of this, came up, and he's in the Republican Party. His name is Justin Amash. I want to say he's from Wisconsin, and he's in the Liberty wing of the Republican Party. He said if these memos come out to be true, impeachment is a real thing that could happen for President Trump.
Absolutely. If the memos as presented in the New York Times article are real and are represented accurately, then yeah, that definitely is a possibility.
I just thought it was interesting. I think he's the first Republican to break ranks and actually use the impeachment word.
Yeah, I believe that would make him the first. Certainly John McCain probably goes to bed at night hoping, but...
I for a little bit of comedy, I saw a tweet the other day that said John McCain probably released less information to the KGB than Donald Trump did in 5 minutes. And if you're not unaware, John McCain was held in a camp for 5 years, I want to say.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So you have to take into account a whole bunch of perspectives here. It's crazy, but stay tuned. We'll keep you updated.
Yep, we will be covering this as it's ongoing. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great evening.